So, welcome everybody. I don't know if you want to start with sharing your screen, Sebastian, or
Yeah. Um, I mean, I can share. Sh is it working? I think it should work.
yes, it's working just fine.
Okay, great. Great, great, great. Yeah, I mean, this is just I can put some of my thought at the beginning, but I think it would be really nice to also have an interactive discussion on because I'm very interested to learn how this kind of technology is actually influencing the work. So I can only imagine or like reason about how people might use it practically, but I'm not using it myself that much actually because we are more on the development side. So there's actually not that much opportunity to, yeah, discuss with people who are more involved in educating the new generation of scholars and teach language and so on. And so, yeah, I would be very interested to have a bit of conversation around how that is playing out at the moment. And yeah, but yeah, I'm happy to start with a couple of thoughts that I have on my side, and then maybe we can turn it into an open discussion after that. Um,
Wonderful, wonderful. So,
yes.
don't know if there are new people in coming in, but just to introduce you a little bit. Sebastian is really a leading figure for us who are working with translation and having to use new tools and integrate them into our work. Also for researchers, finding new ways of doing research through the tools. So it's really a pleasure to have you, Sebastian, and presenting the background like you did this morning. But now engaging in this discussion, I think can be really useful for all of us. So for those who might be new coming in, Sebastian is kind of leading the project on BuddhaNexus or DharmaNexus and the Dharmamitra project. So please, if you have some notes for yourself, keep them until we've heard Sebastian's few notes to introduce the discussion.
Yes. Yeah, so this is basically the part from this morning's presentation that we saved for the afternoon because it was kind of the first part was more focused on the technical offering that Dharmamitra and DharmaNexus make for the scholars. And now this is like my own hypothesis on how scholarship might be influenced in certain ways, and I'm very happy to be challenged. So if anybody has conflicting or different ideas, then please, this is the time to discuss. And I'm just trying to, yeah, put together a picture that I'm seeing emerging in the recent time. So on the one hand, I think in general, there's a very different picture if we look at AI technology from the point of view of people who are mostly doing non-technical work, who maybe use it to look up humanities content and so on, and use it for translation, for gaining knowledge on yeah. And I think in that context, the technology probably hasn't moved that much over the recent years. So we certainly saw a lot of improvement in the beginning period. So the first ChatGPT was, yeah, kind of interesting, but also nothing or like very little of it was reliable. So it could do some fun things, but most of the information it provided was totally hallucinated. Why then with GPT-4 and the current tools, we see some improvements, but I think there's also a certain ceiling that we still have a lot of information in those tools that is not reliable, like especially for historical data, for yeah, content about Tibet, for example. I think Claude is doing probably a quite good job at making some general material accessible. And then there's also Menlam AI. They have the Melong LLM, which maybe some of you are using. I'm not sure, but it's probably a very interesting tool. But yeah, I think we are seeing this leveling out. But then when it comes to programming and to technical tools, AI has been developing really, really fast, and especially the last just 5 or 6 months have been a very restless time where we now have these agents that can write whole programs independently, and they're doing it actually quite good. And you can basically just describe your problem, and after 20 minutes, you come back to your computer. Most of the work has been done, which is fascinating. And I think there's something that is happening here. And I would describe this, I mean, on the one hand, we have this what we call vibe coding, and I do think we might see a bit of that happening in humanity slowly as well. I think that is in my hypothesis for this discussion is that we maybe move towards a time where we have a sort of vibe coding moment for humanities as well. So this idea of vibe coding in quotation marks, this is a new term that basically came up with the new AI technology and programming. So instead of writing all the code yourself and you spend the whole time to figure out how those libraries work and how the programming language work, you actually just describe what you want to do to an LLM, and this will then automatically write the code for you. And this can be done without intricate knowledge of the programming language or the library, so you don't have to learn the details anymore. And then even amateur programmers who don't know the software very well, who don't have extensive training and skills, they can engage in producing software that actually works and that does the desired thing. And obviously, you can imagine how this influences people who are programming. So you are losing the knowledge of the implementation detail. And this happens to me myself. Like I used to be quite fluent in PyTorch and so on. And right now I still know the basics, but I have lost awareness of a lot of the details because we just don't need them anymore. It's like you have your LLM, it will tell you how it works. And then you are kind of skipping over doing it all by hand. And yeah, and we also get into this state where we are not really reading the code and fixing problems directly in the code anymore, but we just describe the problem to the system and then it will start to fix it automatically. So it's not like we revise it all the time, but it just like happens automatically. So this is, I think, the vibe coding experience, how I would describe it, that a lot of programmers are currently making, and I don't know if it's good or bad. It's probably bad from the point of view of knowing the language well, but it's certainly good from the point of view of getting work done because you are just able to do more in the same time. At least for me, that's the case. Um, yeah, and I'm wondering if we may be entering a time of vibe philology where this is also affecting how our scholarship in the field is done. And in a way, I think language knowledge is a critical factor for philological work in Buddhist studies. And this has been certainly the case for my training, and it's probably true in a lot of like textual oriented Buddhist studies programs that unless you learn source languages, you are not able to have a conversation if you are working on classical material. And this, of course, I think we had this in the beginning, in the earlier session today. It's not just limited to the difficult source languages like Sanskrit, Pāli, Chinese, Tibetan, but we also have to usually branch out into multiple modern languages as well to really cover our secondary resources. So this can be English, Japanese, French, German, and more. Depends a bit on the flavor of Buddhist studies, but in general, it's very helpful to know these languages. And obviously, this has implications that are also, I think, structurally not always great when it comes to the ability of young researchers to enter the field. So unless you have a background that is able to cushion you if you decide to study some obscure topic for 10 years. And I think from the point of view of a lot of parents, Buddhist studies might not be the most obvious choice if you're a young researcher trying to enter a field. And then you have to invest maybe 10, 15 years into language education just to get to the point of being able to contribute to the discourse. This is actually a gamble. And of course, these skills don't really translate easily into job opportunities outside of the field. That is just a reality. Yeah, so and not everybody is willing to take this risk, and unless you have a background that makes it easier for you to do, then you're maybe more likely to not enter the field because the language requirements are just really high and it's really difficult to come to the point that you can contribute. So I think AI tools, and there's something optimistic in this. I think AI tools can change this, and they might change it even in a quite dramatical way. So in a way, this need for learning multiple modern languages might disappear completely. So we now have AI tools that are already really good at translation, and while we can argue about the quality of Tibetan to English, for example, I think there's still a lot to be desired, and we have problems in the quality. But if we look at, for example, Japanese to English or French to English, I think we can already see that the quality is so reliable by now that we might be able to just use the machine translations without having the need. I think from French to English, this might already be the case that we can use the machine translations without any necessity of learning French ourselves, in my case at least. So yeah, I think we are moving in a direction where the secondary languages, the modern languages, will just advance at such a rapid pace that we might not need to learn them anymore. So that is a possible future. And I think for primary languages, the problem of hallucination and inaccuracies will remain a major concern, but I also think the gaps are closing, and we see this progress happening at a slower pace, and but it is happening. And I think the retrieval systems and so on we are working on, they are improving. So we also see things changing for primary languages. So I think we might see a future that is developing here, and we might like it or we might not like it. And I'm very happy to hear if other peoples are also feeling a bit concerned about this, because I'm certainly concerned that philological discovery, like for example, this is an example that Kengo Harimoto, my friend here in Japan, um, has presented in Sendai a couple of months ago, because he worked extensively on the NGMPP, the Nepalese German manuscript project in the past, and there has been a manuscript that, even though Kengo himself is not a scholar who's extensively reading Chinese and Tibetan, so that's not really his turf. I think he's very happy to accept that he's more like a Sanskrit scholar who reads manuscripts, but not necessarily works on the identification that much. But he has shown that without deep knowledge of the sources involved here in Chinese um, and in Tibetan, he was able to identify a manuscript fragment from the NGMPP based on Dharmamitra alone. So he basically just used deep research, and he typed in the manuscript, he transcribed it and typed it in, and then with the help of deep research, he could figure out which sutra translations in Chinese and Tibetan are actually representing his text. And then again, with the translation tool, he could figure out, okay, this passage is actually matching here. And he didn't even had to really read Tibetan fluently himself to get there. So this is actually, I think, a first example of successful vibe philology, where somebody kind of has enough knowledge to steer the process, but doesn't really have the stamina to work for months and months to read through the different pages of the Kangyo and so on to really see where the actual text is. So this was basically a identification problem, a difficult one that is certainly something that can be published as an article, which was done completely or like to a large degree by a digital tool with a human in the loop to verify the outcome. And I think in that sense, we probably see how research problems that would have usually taken decades of language training and a deep knowledge of the structure of the data, and in general, I think might be confined to very few people worldwide with the appropriate skill set. So there might only be, I don't know, a handful of scholars that are actually able to read Tibetan, Sanskrit, and Chinese fluently enough to see a fragment of a manuscript and be able to tell, okay, this is probably that sutra, it's probably that. I think that kind of language level and experience with the literature is just very, very rare. But we now are in a time where you might just paste this into Claude or Dharmamitra or Gemini, and you get an answer that could actually be right, and it could actually help you in identifying the system and this question. And I think this is probably a reality that is now slowly unfolding, where we need to understand that it's possible now to solve this problem without fully understanding it. So yeah, I think whether this is good or bad is an open question, but it probably should change how we maybe think about the research questions that we are asking. Then I think on the good end, I want to be a bit positive as well. So what can be good about this? I think one good thing is that democratization of access also means that people who don't handle a certain source language completely well might still be able to be fast enough and accurate enough to do research properly. So if somebody is not reading Tibetan quickly, but can still, with the help of Dharmamitra, understand fast enough whether a text is relevant to their research or not, then this is a net win, I think, and that can be valuable. Then this is also something that we hear frequently from people who use our system, is that even when you have a good domain knowledge and your language ability is good, then still AI tools can be very, very helpful for the lookup of references, for quick readings and so on. So even for people who know their work very well, this can still be a gain in productivity to have this. I also think in education, of course, it's kind of easy to tilt towards this will make students lazy, nobody will study seriously anymore. And I can absolutely see that this can happen, and I'm very aware of that. But I also think there might be a way for people who are disciplined in their use with the tools, that it actually can become more engaging, because you can, in your learning journey, have a tool at your fingertips that you can just ask for. For example, when you're translating yourself and you don't have your teacher or your a peer group around to discuss the translation with yourself, with somebody else, then you might just put it into Dharmamitra or into Gemini and ask, is my translation good? Or you can compare the machine translation with your own translation, which can be a very engaging way to see your own progress and to gauge how that is developing. And I do remember when I studied Sanskrit 12 years ago, it could be quite lonely at times. Like you don't always have people around that spend time with you, that discuss the kind of study you are doing. So I do think these AI tools can actually be very interesting in that regard, because also when something is unclear about grammar, you might go and ask Claude or Gemini or Dharmamitra and get some idea of the grammatical structure and so on. It's of course not always reliable, and that's something to be aware of, but I still think there can also be an upside to education in a way that it can make the process a bit more engaging, a bit more interactive, a bit less static. Yeah, so I want to mention that as well. And then I also think, and this is something that I think is easily overlooked, but for people who don't have English as a native language, AI tools are immensely useful for writing. And this is not just to get quickly done with your work, but I think also because there are subtleties in how non-native speakers frame their language that will always put native speakers off. And there's a kind of inherent discrimination in this. And again, it contributes to inequality in academia, that your language skills, unfortunately, are determining basically how well your scholarship is going to be received. And in that sense, I'm actually very happy about AI, because it levels the field a little bit and it makes it easier for non-native speakers to have a language that can be really present to read and be less obviously done by somebody who has no native capabilities. So I hope that AI might act as an equalizer that can act against discrimination based on language abilities to some extent. It's of course an optimistic take, and maybe the downsides are very real, but I think there's one upside here, that it can help a bit to, yeah, make discrimination based on the background of the student a little bit more, a little bit less obvious, yeah. Then to the bad part. So what I'm thinking is problematic. I mean, obviously, AI tools allow to cut corners, and this will obviously happen certainly when they are used too early and without proper embedding into education. And if somebody is studying a language only to get a degree, but they have no interest in doing anything with that later, then maybe they will decide to only use the Dharmamitra translation instead of doing the work themselves. And then they take that to class, and the teacher figuring out this is only AI, and the student didn't work themselves. So I can obviously see how that is happening, and that is, of course, a pity if it does. I also think that even if we assume everything goes well, so the system like Mitra or Gemini works perfectly well. It is super precise in the retrieval, and even the person using it is a scholar who knows the language. They know what they're doing. They are totally domain experts. So this is like the optimal case. Even then, I think it still has a big risk because these tools do shape how we think about the problems. And if we loop them in too early, they can influence the whole thinking process and not always in a desirable way. So if I'm working on a specific passage and Dharmamitra gives me this 10 list of references across the corpus and they're all very relevant, then basically there's a high chance that this information will already carry me away in a certain direction that might not always be the most productive one. And I have discussed this with Venerable Dhammadina, who made this point that she prefers to use Dharmamitra only after she has already formed her own hypothesis on something, because in her mind it's more productive to work that way. And I can absolutely see the point she's making, because it can be a super powerful verification tool and can give you additional information that is valuable. But if we use it too early in our work, it might actually be not always the best way to integrate it. Yeah. And I think another point that is probably connected with this is that once we have a system that can do a very precise and punctual lookup, so we can give it whatever phrase in Sanskrit or Tibetan we have, and we get all the references in a very precise and reliable way, then we will lose our knowledge of the structure of the corpora and our ability to navigate these independently. This is a fear that I have, and then maybe we will see a new generation of scholars that is now going up with these tools who might be having more problems with this. A little bit like using Google Maps to navigate also makes us less able to understand how the city is looking like in which we navigate. If we immediately know how to go and we only look at the phone and it gives us the direction very precisely, then we actually don't look at our environment anymore. So we don't know what the layout of the city is. And this might also just be one of the dangerous outcomes of the reliance on AI tools. And I also think we might just see a decline of scholars in the new generation of scholars who are really seriously learning multiple languages at the same time. Because it is more convenient to just focus to get one language right and then rely on AI for the others. I think that is a possibility. I hope that there will be people who just take it as an intellectual challenge to study Sanskrit, Chinese, and so on. But we might have a new generation of scholars where this is even happening less than it did in the past. Yeah. So what about the future then? I can imagine that comparative work across multiple languages might be largely automatized in a few years. So if this continues, it might be really in 5 years or 10 years at a point where all the Chinese parallels of a Tibetan passage are located, and there's not much more to discuss about this. So this might be a solved problem in the near future. Given that the data is digitized, of course, that's the limitation. I think translation will require a human in the loop. But this loop might become more and more machine driven. That is possible. But I don't think there's a near term or even a long term future where translation, in the sense of publishing translations as an intellectual work, will be replaced by humans. I really don't. I will be replaced by machines, and I really don't think that will happen. I also think that the more like manuscript-oriented philological work is going to be difficult to automatize at the moment because we had this in the earlier session today, that the OCR systems are still making significant mistakes, and especially for manuscripts, for Ume, for example, and handwriting, it's still very, very far away from being ideal. So this will take a long time, I think. I think for Tibetan block prints, for example, we already have pretty good tools at the moment that can do a lot of useful work, I think for Chinese as well. But yeah, for anything in Indic scripts, for handwritten material, it's still a long way to go. So I think that is one pocket of the work here where I think it will take some time before AI is really integrated. It will come at some point, I think, and I can imagine once we have a reliable OCR for Indic manuscripts, for example, that this can change a lot of our work as well. Yeah. Yeah. So when it comes to the workflow of doing critical editions, for example, if we think about that as one possible application, I think maybe in 5 or 10 years we have a workflow where we are creating diplomatic editions that is based on OCR and HTR software, and maybe some manual intervention, some post correction where we make some emendations, some changes to the output of the machine. And then also the collation of multiple sources. I think especially those of you who are working with Tibetan canonical material, I do remember that I still had to do the 4 Kangyo editions and compare them syllable by syllable when I worked on my MA thesis. So that was a lot of work, but I think this is really something where I see a lot of automatization being useful. Like when we have a good OCR of the block prints, then we can just use collation software like Charles Lee is developing, and then we can basically automatize the creation of the critical apparatus, and we only need to make some decisions on what emendations we want to do by the end of the day. Also, the whole lookup for relevant passages when we want to give references where our text is citing some other text and so on. I also think that we are on a trajectory where a lot of that can be automatized to the extent that the editor only has to make decisions on which of these references are actually relevant and worthwhile to mention. But yeah, we are getting more and more useful tools to help here. Then I also think AI will be used a lot in validating the language. So simple things like typos, wrongly applied diacritics, impossible compositor, and so on. I think that this will happen quite quickly, that AI can be a useful spell checker for the kind of work we do, both in Tibetan and in Sanskrit, I think. Maybe not at the current stage, not yet, but I can absolutely see how we will get that. Then I also think the translation process is probably something that will be done more and more in tandem with AI tools. So either by using AI translations for the draft or by checking your own translation after you have done it against an AI translation as an alternative opinion, and then to do like an A/B comparison. I think I have heard different workflows from different people. So some prefer to use a draft translation, others compare. So both of these seem used. And then, of course, the lookup for relevant secondary literature via AI tools will also, I think, become a natural step at some point, even though there are certain things in place that we need to overcome first, like to agree on how to handle copyright and so on. That is still out there. And then, of course, I think AI is already used. I'm very sure it's already used a lot in the final polishing of the work we do when we write articles, the introduction, the translation, the footnotes, and so on. And I guess there's probably this is not the most concerning part. It's just about the shape of the language and of finding typos, mistakes, and so on. So is philological Buddhist studies in that sense over now? I don't really think so, but I do think that we are changing the massive pace in key areas of our field, and that also raises the questions on how we train people, like what kind of skills are still necessary and how do we test for those skills? Is I think probably a lot of people here on the workshop have better experience and better knowledge about this than I have, but it's, I think, the obvious question, yeah, how to test for knowledge in the future when all of these tools are available. Yeah, I think we are still lacking progress in some key areas around OCR and HTR. So the automatization of philology is still unrealistic, I think. And I also think that just structurally, and this also is about the technology itself, because AI models are trained in a way that they are optimizing for statistically likely solutions. But good scholarship often requires us to go against the most common pattern. Um, and we have to often think out of the statistically most likely solution in order to arrive at the correct solution. And that is, of course, in philology, we have this idea of lectio difficilio, which means in certain dubious cases, going for the more difficult solution can actually be the better one. And this is something that AI models, I think, will be just by their structure not be able to handle in the future, not the way we are training them right now. So I think there will still be the human in the loop when it comes to both critically editing a text, but also for producing reliable, good translations that will have to remain. But I think we also probably have to get used to vibe philology in some way, for better or for worse, being able to answer research questions that until 2 or 3 years ago, only people who studied 3 or 4 languages for many, many years were able to do. We might see this being more and more solved by people without the same level of training, just by a clever combination of these AI tools. I'm maybe hoping that these AI tools can help a little bit to overcome what I think Jonathan Silk called once the balkanization of Buddhist studies, which I think is a real problem, that we have a field that is a bit fragmented into different camps. So in a way, philologists who are very text-oriented might be able to cover more ground and start to engage with more abstract questions. That would be probably a good thing. But then also, at the same time, we might also be less bogged down in doing all of this textual research, because finding more textual parallels, if it's largely automatized, then maybe we can focus more on interesting research questions, and need to spend less time on just establishing the text, which I think would be a good thing. On the other hand, maybe religious studies scholars and people who don't have the same level of training might also gain more access to primary sources, because the AI technology hopefully can bridge some gaps that so far only language training were able to fill. So maybe there's some hope that this technology can bring the field a bit closer together as well. Yeah, I think that's kind of all I can say at this point. I just want to reinforce that I'm very happy for the Tzada Foundation that is making the daily operations of Dharmamitra possible, because these kind of projects are, as you can imagine, not cheap, and especially hosting them to a public audience, making them accessible to thousands of users is difficult, and academic funding is not well structured to do this. So it's really difficult to argue for these public services in academic context. So we are extremely happy that Tzada Foundation is supporting this and has an active interest in making these tools available to a public. So without their help, this would not be possible. Then also the Center for Integrated Japanese Studies here in Tohoku University, which is also very supportive of the project and making it possible for me to devote a lot of time on the continued development, which is also fantastic. And then we have Fokuhang AI, which is also significantly supporting Dharmamitra, and is working on their own AI application for their own community. So this is also fantastic. And then lastly, and very importantly, most importantly, is Kurt Kreutzer, who together with his students and postdocs and the Berkeley AI Research Lab have facilitated and enabled the development of Dharmamitra over the last 2.5 years, since 2023. Yeah. So this is where I want to say special thanks to all of this. Yeah. Okay, and then I think I'm very happy to enter the discussion on these points. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, because you're bringing some very important question for us at RYI. This is the kind of center of our interest to train people in that way. So there are very many questions you touched on. There are dangers of weakening the grammatical learning, for example, which seems very important in the end to make decisions as researchers. Reduce the responsibility of interpretation is another danger. Like, how do we kind of really fully become responsible rather than just relying, which means also that we need to reference, and how do we reference, to what degree we reference our work. These will be questions that are important for our students too. There's the kind of overconfidence that comes when you use a tool. You think that you know what is going on, but you might be a little bit over confident. The problem of attention, using a lot of AI tools and so on. So all these questions I would like for us to kind of think through, if you have some ideas, and then we can also open the floor to people. I know you've asked people to come up with actual examples of how they use the tools, and we have sent a message, so everybody here should have kind of a few examples to illustrate some questions. So I don't know if you want to address, like, for example, the referencing part or something like that.
Yeah, no, this is a very good question, and I have also written it down as one of the things that I would like to talk in this session about. Yeah, I mean, I would like to have it as an open question to the participants as well. What do you think? Should tools like Dharmamitra be referenced in scholarship? What about Gemini? What about Claude? What is the current approach to this? I think also about people who teach at the moment. What do you tell your students? And yeah, what do you think should be done here? I'm very curious. Yeah.
So maybe I'll just say a few things about that, because this is at the heart of my reflection over AI tool. I really encourage students to actually tell us and put a footnote about how they use AI, for what purpose, for so accumulate and perhaps properly. Maybe other people have some ideas about that or some thoughts.
I think your connection was breaking a bit for me, but I think I got the most. I hope I got the gist that you are like motivating your students to report and to be transparent in their use of the tools.
Yeah, and actually, accumulate data. So learn more about how these tools are being used.
Yeah.
Yes, Adam?
Just a tiny little comment on that one. I know, just to say, at the university in Munich, for instance, in Indology and Tibetology, the senior teachers there are openly referring to Dharmamitra for their translation as a translation tool, and they open, as I've come across, they openly, are very transparent that they've used it as a, as an assistance, as a guide for alternative perspectives on their own translations, or as you say, for any languages they're not quite a full master of, but they can use it as a ready reckoner, and yeah, so that's what I've come across there. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, great. No, I think that makes me very happy to hear. And I think I will also hopefully be able, I think it's already planned to do a visit to Munich in May. So I hope we can also discuss that more closely. But yeah, this is encouraging to hear. I'm happy about that. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, I mean, this would be one of my questions for maybe in addition to that for people who are actually teaching language. I don't know if they're teachers on the core, but what is your experience with the students at the moment? Is it like, are they using these tools all the time? Or are the students in general more disciplining themselves and restraining from using it too early? Or is it like you have those, and there are some who are obviously just trying to get through, and others who are studying very carefully? So this would be my question. What is the current experience on that? Yeah. Yeah, I think Diana, you're muted, but I think Bruno, we see your hand. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Sebastian.
Hi.
This is not, I do not have a reply. Sorry, I raised my hand at the wrong point in time. I think I do
Sorry.
not have a reply to your question right now.
Mm.
So maybe you want to wait for if somebody has a reply to that.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody has something to say on that.
Just
yeah.
for that question, here at RYI we have some professors that are very adamant to not use AI for the learning process until. So there is a kind of a strong push against for the learning process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can understand that actually. I think I would probably be very hesitant myself to advertise these tools. I do remember, I mean, we already had this, some like more basic tools were available for Sanskrit already in like 2013. Like you had the grammatical engine, for example, of the of Jeddah and so on, which are very useful, but they also make certain lookup processes much more much easier than it would be by using grammar books like Whitney or Stenzel. And in that regard, when I was the assistant teacher for Sanskrit in Hamburg, I also decided not to mention these tools before they have at least completed the first year, and then maybe gradually introduce like online dictionaries and so on slowly in the second year. Like you can actually look up Money-Williams automatically and so on, those things only in the second year. And then I think AI tools probably, I would think maybe not before the third or fourth year, something like that. I don't know. How to really do it in detail is another question, but I can absolutely see the point that it is a valuable thing to resist introducing them too early, or to, if so, maybe to introduce them in a very disciplined way, like only check your translation after you have done it. You can compare it and you can maybe get some insights, but not to work with it from the outset. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the whole discussion also about not only about production, right? There is a whole learning that is happening in interacting with the language above and beyond having the translation at the end. So that human side of things seems to be important to emphasize also.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I can say this just as a comment from my own experience, that when learning Japanese, I'm actually more happy to do it with a pen and paper than with an AI tool next to me. And there's just something about learning to think in the language, which is very difficult to achieve if you're constantly using the AI to get back into your own more familiar language, I think. And in a way, these AI tools can be disruptive, even though if I have some difficult material, then throwing it into an AI to pass some of the administrative language, for example, for stuff here, this can be incredibly helpful, and it kind of makes something that is impenetrable, like slowly penetrable, and then whatever language you have, it makes you able to meet in the middle. At least for Japanese, that is happening for me. So I mean, yeah, there are probably both sides are true to some extent. Yeah.
Just one little postscript then on that point.
Mm-hmm.
What I've heard is that it's as you say, is to try and do to do your own translation first thoroughly, because it can blind you. You know, once you've seen, if you jump too quickly, it can blind you to other possibilities. So what I've heard is, you know, even if you look at somebody transcribing a script in digital, and then you haven't seen the manuscript, and then when you look at the manuscript, there are other possibilities for the characters, and so it can actually you may have to end up redoing the work if you don't thoroughly check all the possibilities. Thoroughly, you know, the semantic range of the words, and so you actually may have to sort of, if you jump too quickly to a given solution, you may have to redo it because you haven't quite drilled down to the bottom of the barrel. So it's always good to do your own as thoroughly as you can. So that's what little I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just to add on that, because I think there's also something on the whole idea of machine translation and the technology behind that, that I think structurally works a bit against how translation is done in our field. And that is, machine translation is traditionally trained as something where you have one sentence in language A and there's one translation in language B. And there's this like very clear, unambiguous A to B mapping. And this is how the machine is then trained. You collect all of these sentences as examples, and then you teach the system to go from A to B. And this might work okay if we think about translating, I think, maybe news articles from Chinese into English. There's like a straightforward process, probably, even though there might be a lot of edge cases as well. And we might have a lot of ambiguity as well. But obviously, if we think about a Sanskrit verse full of shleshas, we have 5, 6, 7 different ways to translate it that are actually intended by the authors. So it's not even possible to cover that in the language that we are translating into. Like, it's almost mechanically impossible. And I'm very sure that must be similar for Tibetan verses as well, where you have just such a range of possible meanings that can't be really conveyed. And in that sense, the whole idea of saying this is one translation for one doesn't work. And I can totally imagine that what you described happens if you get your translation too early. You're basically settling down on one interpretation, and then your mind might be short circuit in a way, okay, this is where I stop now. And I think this is like rarely addressed as a research question, like how we can cover this breadth of possible interpretation in machine translation as a desired outcome. I think so far it was more like seen as a weakness of a system if it's not able to come up with one solution. But I think this should actually be an intended outcome. So yeah, I can absolutely see that. Yeah.
So there is Bruno Sonam. There is also Aluna who has a question on the chat. So maybe we go Bruno first, and I will read Aluna's question, and then we'll go to Sonam.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Bruno. I'm an associate translator with 84,000. And yeah, I want to thank you also for this really excellent presentation this morning, and for taking the time to introduce us to the tool, or present the tool that you developed. For me, it was really interesting because I have a lot of random thoughts and questions and comments. So please, if possible, bear with me for a couple of minutes.
Sure.
The first thing that I wanted to mention is because you specifically asked for how organizations or institutions work with AI and Dharmamitra and other tools. And so I'm not sure if you're aware of it, you probably are, but maybe also for others on this call. So the 84,000 organization has drafted an AI concept paper, which outlines the way in which we see the current state of AI in Buddhist studies and translation mainly. And then also some policy recommendations or recommendations for the translators, how to engage with these tools with regard to their translation work. So that's available. I could post this in the chat if that would be interesting, but I have to find the link. So actually, Bob Miller, who is also on this call, he is the lead author of this paper, which is was a lot of work, I guess. I'm not sure if he's still live or it's pretty late where he is. Hi. And then at 84,000, we also have developed a questionnaire when or if you use AI tools in your translation work to document the way it has been used in your translation work. These two remarks. Then another remark that just popped into my mind was what you described with learning Japanese. I recently made a very for me, curious observation. So I went to a university library where I haven't been for many, many years to do some work. And I sat down, opened my computer, and I looked around me, and the whole hall was full of students in their 20s, I would say, beginning of their 20s. And I would say that probably 40% of the students who were sitting there had in front of them a laptop or a tablet, but in addition to that, a pencil and paper, and they would actually write their essays or whatever work they had to do on paper, and then use the electronic gadget for whatever research and that was for me a really that was really interesting for me to see that maybe, and this would be my ideal future of technology, that maybe, as you also said, it not necessarily has to be the case that technology completely replaces certain manual tasks, human tasks, or the human factor in it. And that brings me to the next as more like a question that I have actually. So I'm very intrigued by all these tools, and I personally use Dharmamitra and also Claude, not immediately connected with my translation work, but for some research tasks, Dharmamitra especially, I use to find parallel passages, intertextual for intertextuality questions. And there the picture, and this is also what I'm hearing from colleagues, is so to be quite honest with you, it's a little mixed, but that may also have to do with the nature of the literature we are engaging with. So I mainly work with Tibetan text. And so we have in the Kanjur, so we are primarily working in the Kanjur still at 84,000. We have, especially when it comes to Tantra, to Buddhist Tantra, some texts or passages within texts that are very, very difficult to understand. Sometimes it's coded language, sometimes it's just the translation is let's put it like this, has a complicated relationship with its assumed source text. We, in many cases, do not know or do not have the Sanskrit sources or other Indic languages from which it was translated. So, in short, sometimes these texts produce very strong headaches in trying to translate them, making heads and tails of it. And so there, the question is, so first of all, if you then go and translate or use a machine translation to try to get an understanding or a second opinion, so to speak, on this text, the problem is that, that would be my question, how you see it. So for us, the problem is, for example, if you, as a human translator with all these years of study and knowledge accumulation and experience, in many cases, behind, so in your back, if you have no clue what a verse is talking about, for example, or a sentence, and then to rely on a machine translation with no means of verifying, especially where you said there's this black box process where we do not know how the AI arrives at the solution. So this can be very, very tricky, I think. And this is not with some of the texts we're working with, this is not just a small percentage of passages. This is sometimes extensive, And then also when it comes to the research tool, so I think basically what I'm trying to say is, and I think, I'm not sure who it was, I think Adam or somebody else mentioned it. Yeah, it was Adam who said that one of the difficulties with using AI is, even as an experienced researcher, if you have no means of verifying the accuracy of the outcome, then what justifies relying on the authority of AI? You see, there's even a term, I think, in English. I'm not sure now what the term is, but it has something to do with bias. Like, if you cannot verify the outcome, then how can you trust or rely on that? So that would be one problem that I see. The other big problem that I see is when I think about work, especially comparative and intertextual work by scholars like the late Michael Hahn, or I don't know who you studied with in Hamburg, but Lambert Schmidhausen, and there's many, many other names we could, toss around. So when we think about the intricacies of philology, especially Indo-Tibetan philology and comparative work, do you have the feeling or the fear that if machine translation and AI supported research becomes more and more prominent in Buddhist studies, that somehow this could, how to say, like make this whole field more shallow in a sense compared to works of really great previous scholars, especially also if then alongside this development, the education of people gets less and less, and
So
the means
maybe
of verifying also, become like the capacity of verifying AI output becomes more limited in people as time goes on. So do you have the fear that this might become really shallow and flatten out at some point? And then, so I'm sorry, one more thing, if I may.
Please
So the
make it
last point that
concise, because there is a lot of questions coming.
Yes, I'm sorry. So the last point, and I make this very short, is so this is also what I've heard from colleagues, is when we use the the search or deep research function of Dharmamitra, many passages or suggestions, so the output that it generates in many cases seems irrelevant to us. And my question was, is there any way of tweaking? Are there filters that we could engage or that we don't know about, or how does the process work, you know,
Yes.
on the deep end or the back end? Because the question that then that we ask ourselves is, these tools are supposed to make our work faster in a sense and more comprehensive. But then at the end, if you have to go through, let's say, like 1,000 passages where you realize, oh, actually, this only contains 2 syllables. You know, the only match that this reference has to my query or to my passage or to my text is like 2 syllables that it shares with, you know, my citation. Then the question is, what is the time advantage that we have here? You know, and the question is this, could this be optimized? Let's say, put it like that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving me that.
I mean, yeah, I think I get 2 main points that we can talk about here. And I think the first part is, and I fully agree, that Dharmamitra cannot be an authoritative resource. So it's like, it's technically impossible. So I think to say that there's authority in the AI tool, and that includes Dharmamitra, I think that's a mistake. I think, and that's a structural problem. And I think this goes further than just Dharmamitra or Gemini or whatever. I think deep learning is fundamentally not suited as an argument in research, because what is the use? Imagine we can train a classifier that can determine whether a text is written by Vasubandhu or not. This could be an interesting thing. People would be very happy to get that kind of tool. But what is the use of a tool that is a black box and says us this is a Vasubandhu text and this is not? I think if there's no way to understand how the machine came to the conclusion, it cannot be an authoritative argument. And I think this would be my point about using Dharmamitra in any way possible, like as a translation tool, as a research tool to look up passages and so on. I think it is never useful without a human who is able to understand if the output is useful or not. And in that way, I think the BDSC search on its own is not authoritative, but it can give you ideas of where you have to look for in order to do your research. And this is how I see Dharmamitra as well. Like it's a crutch. It's a tool that works. In a way, it's a very good assistant to a Schmidhausen, but it will never be a Schmidhausen, to put it in those words, since you mentioned that. So I think this just needs to be cleared. It cannot be an authoritative resource. Yeah.
So one quick follow-up question. And do you agree, or do you also think, I have read this several times, that this is an inherent problem of LLMs? So this is a problem that will never be solved, right? Or
yes, I think with the current technology, I'm not seeing it being solved. No. Yeah. Yes, and the second question about the filtering, yes, this is clearly a problem, and I think the biggest weakness of the deep research system at the moment. And we are launching the Explore mode now, I think in a couple of days, so that will basically address this. So then you have the ability to filter. You can set your, for example, the Tantra section of the Kangyo as your target exploration field and so on in order to solve this. So this should filter out most of the irrelevant things. Yeah. So this, yeah, it's obviously it's a limitation. We have seen that as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So we will have Sonam, Alina, then Sonam, then there is a Mitri, and then Damcher. So just to have this in line. So Alina is asking, I would like to hear your comments on model collapse and AI aging in the Dharmamitra and Nexus environments.
Yes, I mean, just for those of you who are maybe not familiar with this term, I think the general idea of model collapse is that since the more AI models are available, and now we are using AI models in a lot of places, and I think a lot of content on the internet is obviously generated by AI models, like Facebook postings are just outputted and Twitter posts, whatever we can imagine. Like the internet is basically flooded with this stuff. Lots of fake websites, they're everywhere. And of course, what then happens is the new generation of AI models that is now being constructed, they need to get the data from somewhere. So they will crawl all of these websites, they will consume the output of AI models that has been already been full of hallucination before. And obviously the hallucination will become stronger and stronger, the models become less reliable. And this is like a really old problem in deep learning, something that was already seen 10 years ago. If you train a model on the output of another model, it will collapse very quickly. And this is the idea of AI collapse that Aliona is mentioning in her comment, that once there's this output everywhere, then you will have problems to train new models. And I think Dharmamitra in a way is a little bit it's to some extent under the danger, but it's also in a very good position not to be under the danger of this, because we are mostly focusing on creating an environment that has databases and verifiable sources. So we have our own data collections, we have the primary sources, like, I mean, the digital representations of them, the e-text of the Kangyo, the Tengyo, and the Nyingma material, as well as the Chinese canon, and so on. So this is all data that has already been verified by humans to be authentic. So this is not AI generated output. And this is what we are focusing on, is to accumulate more of this data to make sure that we have a reliable resource. So we are relying less on the AI model for the quality of our output, but more on verifiable data. And this, I think, is really important in the future. And when it comes to model collapse, I think when we see that happening, I think we can always revert to using the previous generation of models on our own hardware. We can host this ourselves, hopefully in Tohoku in the future, so that we are independent of the collapse of public large language models. So I hope we can battle that, but it's going to be a challenge if it happens. But I think structurally Mitra is working in a way that we are resilient against this kind of problems. Yeah.
Thank you. Sonam, I think that's your turn now.
Okay, if my connection is good enough here.
Oh, it's excellent, I think. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Yeah, the environment of reliable data that you mentioned, yeah, that you're trying to create, is then what we should all go for. Just organize the human knowledge that we have that is reliable. And yeah, how about we all become a little bit more relaxed about copyrights where possible? And yeah, what I said in the morning session, I will now talk to my colleagues. Let us give Sebastian all our translations. All the Drikung texts have recently been published in Tibet by a group of masters in e-text format. So I'll provide you with that too. And you have the tools to align it. And this would be an awesome resource, like the Treasury of Knowledge translations that are solid, done by humans, solid knowledge. We can search it now. So we all contribute that. Reliable knowledge, reliable data produced by humans, checked, maybe peer-reviewed and whatnot, and only use that and create a hub for all these Buddhist translations that we all have already created and that are reliable and not too much hallucinated.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. That's exactly the kind of spirit I hope, if it really settles in our community, if it spreads, then I think we can make ourselves more resilient to the future also, I think, because we had the similar discussion, like Julian Schott was here 2 weeks ago. We had our small event on e-text for Sanskrit, and I think it's a bit of a similar situation when we think about e-text for Sanskrit, which has always been a very fragmented effort with people in different places trying things, and to really get a community effort going where people say, okay, let's do this together. This would be really great. And I mean, I can already see, like, the Tzara Foundation is very open with the AI technology now, and they certainly want to also see that they contribute their translations to some extent to the system. And I think if we get enough people involved, and obviously accreditation and references is something Dharmamitra would very is very willing and very working on to provide, so that we can really in the future have, like, for each translation a footnote about existing human translations and then link to the actual file. Then people can look at the e-text, maybe at the PDF. I think this would be fantastic. Yeah, this is like, I think it would solve a lot of the problems that we have now with the technology, and would be great for the field, I think.
Yeah, it just depends on people contributing. Yeah. So, okay, I hope I can do that soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Great, wonderful. I think other people are working like that. I remember Ngawang Trinley also is trying to network with others. So we're seem to be on the same page on collaboration right now. So this is quite wonderful. Mitri is asking you, is there already a comparison between Dharmamitra, Menlam AI, Melong AI, or something like that, or others? Yeah.
So I think historically in the beginning, Dharmamitra and Menlam AI, we used the same translation system. So this was our collaboration between Berkeley and Menlam AI in 2023, where we trained the models with the data that NT's team had collected at that time, Nawang Tringley, which was a fantastic effort. And so for the first, I think, year or so, we were sharing the models between the project, and we were both using basically the same model. I'm not really sure what Menlam AI is using nowadays for translation. So because I work mostly with NT, and I think he's not working with the project anymore. So for that reason, I'm also not up to date what they are actually doing. But yeah, and also Melong AI, we actually looked at that closely, and it's a really cool model. So I think it's a great achievement of the Menlam AI team, but it is designed to do something rather different than Dharmamitra. So Melong AI, I think, only outputs in Tibetan, if I'm not mistaken, and it has a strong access to specific resources that Menlam AI has. For example, the Menlam dictionary is integrated in Melong AI, I think, and so therefore it's a really good resource for this kind of information that we don't have on Dharmamitra. So they are really tools for different users, I think. Dharmamitra is more facing people who work with English, who want to output into English, and who are, doing maybe philologically oriented translation. I think that's a bit where we are aiming, which I think is different from Melong AI.
Thank you. So Damcher, your turn.
Thank you, Sebastian, for the presentation and sharing this time with us and explaining everything so clearly. And to ROI, of course, for arranging this. I'm from Spain. I work in a Dharma center, so my work is mainly translation. I recently completed the MA in translation in Ranjung Yeshe, and now I'm implementing that in my work here, my service here. And I wanted to ask you about different AIs doing better certain tasks. I think at the beginning, the first part of your presentation, you mentioned about it, that there are certain AIs that do certain tasks better. And I wanted to ask you about that, because for me, at least, it's like at the beginning, I can do like some OCR in my tiny little experience, OCR with Dharmamitra. And after the translation, after I do the translation, then I polish maybe with Gemini or something like that. But I know I'm missing a lot of stuff here. And I would really like to know about like what would you recommend for the different stages of the translation process? Working in Tibetan, but I guess that it cannot be applied to other languages.
Yeah, I think this also really depends on what your own preference is. And I think if you are comfortable with doing the part in the middle without AI assistance, then I would say that maybe you don't have to change that. I think that is probably a good status quo. It really depends. I think if I was purely advising a project that has to maximize on output, and I think in our world of Dharma translation, it's usually not the case. I think that we are trying to just translate more and more. But I think in that context, I would probably say that Claude and Gemini with the project abilities can be really helpful because you can integrate existing translations, you can upload them to the project, and then you can translate, and the model is then able to call on the references from your existing work. So I think this can be kind of useful because in a way that then functions like a CAT tool, like a computer-assisted translation tool. And these are also, I think, yeah, depending on how big your translation project is, how comprehensive it is, I think sooner or later working with CAT tools can also be really helpful, especially if I think there are certain genres of literature where repetition might be happening a bit more, where similar sentence patterns are occurring a bit more frequently. So I think for any of these cases, CAT tools can be incredibly useful. Maybe not so much if it is very philosophical material or what Bruno mentioned before. I think certain tantric material where the language is extremely cryptical, then I think also computer-assisted translation tools might not be necessarily very useful, or AI tools for that matter. I think they probably also come to their limits quickly. So yeah, I think that really depends, but my recommendation would be to look into the project functionality of Claude and of Gemini and to experiment with uploading files and then yeah, seeing if this can be helpful in the translation workflow. And if it's not helpful, then that's also perfectly fine. I think that just validates that maybe in your specific workflow it's not necessarily needed. Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. There is a long discussion by Mitritika, but basically, student of journalism and mass communication, working in India with on translation. But basically, the point I think that is there has to do with translation being about cultural sensitivity, bringing ethical questions, and having true value in human understanding rather than the product itself. So maybe you can say something about that. And if I didn't address the question, we can ask Meditika to be concise, but to the point in commenting. Do you have any comments on those points?
Yeah, I need some moment to pass just to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just looking at it right now. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, but I think if I understand the conclusion correctly, that the point of Munitika is about basically a combination or the synthesis between, on the one hand, having a engagement with your own mind in the process of translation, of understanding a text, but then also the just practical concerns around speed and the practicality of the translation, which might be also different in commercial translation if you are doing this for as an output-oriented work, different from Dharma translation, I think. Yeah, but yeah, I agree that, Paul, we need to have a responsible hybrid approach where we don't deny the existence of these tools, but actually make ourselves familiar and see how they can work in our daily work, and then to use them where it makes sense, and not to avoid thinking ourselves and avoiding to do the intellectual labor. I think that's the important part, that we don't stop doing the intellectual labor just because we have powerful tools available. Yeah.
So is there any other comments or questions from our group?
If there's time, I would like to just ask Sebastian, did I understand correctly that you said last year you basically stopped training for translation and instead moved to developing tools? So, what was the thinking behind that? And also, if you don't train for translation, how does Dharmamitra keep up with the developments in the large commercial LLMs?
Mm. Yeah, so I think our experience with training machine translation models was at some point what we already touched upon previously in the discussion is that machine translation models are technically optimized to provide one target translation based on reference translations. And I think this is just, if we think about how people who are translating text from the Kangyo, from the Tengyo, are working, I think this is a fundamentally not entirely justified approach because in general, I think a good translator and anyway a good scholar will try to have as much evidence as possible at their fingertips before they make a decision on translating. And for Buddhist studies, this often requires the engagement with resources in multiple languages and also finding the relevant references in the same language. So this was where we realized that this might be really a dead end if we just want to optimize for the one wide translation based on reference translation. So it's not really, I mean, it's maybe a bit misunderstanding if I say we stopped training for translation. I think that sounds too drastic. I think we shifted the focus of seeing machine translation as a single end to one step in a larger research environment where we have the gathering of relevant similar passages as a very vital step to get a fuller picture across languages, to then provide references, and then have the translation as a step that is based on this data to be as informed as possible, and in that way to improve the machine translation quality along the way. And I think this seems to be the more successful road because our feedback that we got from the users and also in our benchmarking kind of shows that the system works better than it used to work before we did that. So this is a bit of a directional shift, but I think also one that fits well in how scholarship is done in Buddhist studies. So yeah, that is maybe if I had to specify how we made that decision, it's in this direction. And I think the other part is also that it's for academic projects just incredibly difficult to keep up with the top models when it comes to performance. So there was a time where Menlam AI and Mitra were kind of happy to train these models because nobody else was doing it. And there was this certain time when Claude was still not able to do anything reasonable in Tibetan. I think before the summer of 2024, if we go back like 2.5 years from now, maybe 3 years, there was this clear time where Claude was not yet very useful for a lot of things. And it was, I think, a very specific moment when Claude got these sudden abilities to deal with Tibetan literature, which I think changed a lot. And suddenly Facebook was full of people trying out to have Claude write a commentary on a Tibetan verse, and it actually could do meaningful things in that regard. And that was amazing. But this was also kind of the moment where we realized, okay, if we want to train these models on our small academic budget, we probably won't have a lot of fun in the future because obviously these multi-billion-dollar companies can just get all the books from Amazon that have been ever written on Buddhism, and they have a much larger compute resources to train those models. So it kind of became a dead end to do this generative work ourselves. So then we pivoted to focusing on precise information retrieval, to have the multilingual part in place, to do like specific grammar models and so on. So this seems the more valuable contribution that Mitra can make, because the translation itself, I guess, sooner or later, Gemini and the other big models will be the best tools for that. So Mitra can always try to do a bit in extra to that, like Sonam Spitz said before. We can provide the references, we can add the human translations, we can link into 84,000, into BDRC and so on. And this is, I think, a valuable contribution that Gemini and Claude will never put the effort to provide this. I think they are not interested in helping any project in our community directly, I think. But I think this is where Dharmamitra can play a meaningful role by being a platform where this is actually happening, where we are integrating those resources into the AI technology in a responsible way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think also it's has a lot of promise what you guys have what you have been presenting today. And also it also in my experience is that the big commercial LLMs are developing quite rapidly when it comes to translation performance.
Yes, that's also true. And for that reason, I think this is also why I would encourage anybody working with these tools to also constantly check out what the other tools are doing. If Gemini is improving at a high speed, and the same can be said for Claude and other tools. And yeah, I think that's just part of the reality here that we probably it's really difficult for independent projects to keep up with that. And this is also why I'm more on the skeptical end if people promote or promise to train the one LLM for Buddhist studies. I think that's a very good way to waste a lot of money, in my opinion. So I'm careful with that, because as soon as we have done that and maybe we spend $1 or $2 million on it, then the next Gemini generation will be around and might be already better than whatever we have done. So yeah, I think interfacing is maybe a better solution than to train. Yeah.
So let me ask you a question more perhaps from the perspective of an institution like Rangjung Yeshe. We've been investing a lot of energy in training translators. And now the question is, how do we continue to do this work, because it's still needed? But how do you think would be best to integrate these tools in the research, perhaps part of the methodology? Like, how do we kind of like create that bridge with these new tools that will definitely change the whole game, right? So do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, the ability. So I think the ability to provide references for these tools, like the deep research system of Mitra, as well as if we think about a future version of Mitra that provides references for the English translation as well, I think there's genuine value in that probably goes way beyond translation, where I think a responsible integration into the workflow of translators and people in training, even in training, can be very meaningful. I also think, and this is something on the part of Mitra, which I think we have to take serious in the future, is that we should try not to intervene too much in the cognitive process of the users of our system. And what I mean by that is, instead of providing a summary of the secondary literature on whatever topic, we should provide references, but maybe not try to digest the data already for the users, because that is, I think, something that will then again lead to the problem of shortcutting intellectual cognitive processes that we don't want to shortcut. I think we want to keep the people engaged, because I think the AI models, in a way, they offer the easy way out. I think that you get a summary of your reference, but you then stop to interact with it anymore. And this is the real problem, I think. And if we just communicate to the user, okay, here's a Tibetan passage that is similar to your Sanskrit sentence, and please engage with this. This is relevant to your work. I think this is a fantastic help. But if we And that also goes for secondary literature. If we provide, okay, here's a book and that page, it has worked on the problem that you are engaging with, I think this is genuinely valuable. But if we start as an AI model to provide an answer, where we then say, okay, based on this and that resource, this is the answer to your research question, I think that's a dangerous direction. And I see this on the responsibility of Dharmamitra to see that we avoid going too much into that direction. And that might be a way to provide this technology in a responsible way to our community. So that's something that I would really hope we can achieve in the future. I think whether translation is still a meaningful task or not, I would maybe play devil's advocate and turn it around and ask, was it ever a meaningful task? Not to say that I don't think it's meaningless, not at all, but I think in a way, I think there's a lot of, let's say, spiritual activity and devotion involved in doing Dharma translation. Yeah, and that is not anything where I believe a lot of the work actually happens in the human who does it, and it also happens in the humans who engage with the outcome of that. And I think none of this should or can be shortcutted by AI technology. I can understand how it sounds very scary that AI technology is there and you can suddenly paste Tibetan sutras and get an English translation. But I hope that the translation community, the translators as well as the people who read the translations, I hope there can be a healthy sense of immunity against this, that this has always been something that humans are doing for humans, I think. And I don't see how this should fundamentally be in danger by AI technology. But yeah, I wonder if there are other opinions on this, but I hope at least that this can stay something that is disconnected from that, yeah.
Yeah, in some way it addresses the whole question of also university education, not necessarily only task-oriented, but developing the whole person, the emotional, the spiritual, the cognitive capacities, and so on, as a value in and of itself. And these are long, century-old discussions, but in some way, AI is bringing that even more to the forefront, isn't it? So there is a question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I fully agree. And in a way, I'm happy that I was still mostly trained without all of these tools being so powerful, because in that sense, it was a bit easier so far to get to this point. But yeah, I think in the future, this is a big question. Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah, really in the sense of a Dharmamitra who would tell you, look here if you need to know more, and not say, you know what, I'll do it for you.
Exactly. I think that's precisely the small distinction that is very important. And in a way, I think the translation capability of Dharmamitra is somewhere in between the two poles. I think it's kind of can be seen as just being, look here, this is also how you could do it, but it can also be understood in a way of, okay, here's your solution. And I think this is a bit the ambiguity of the machine translation. But I think it certainly becomes a more important question for the deep research mode and for whatever kind of answer capabilities Mitra might have, even if it's just inadvertently. So yeah, I think we will try to work in a direction that it's more like opening more possibilities than providing definitive answers and then closing the scholarly engagement. Yeah.
So a comment from ACP. I am relatively new to all these AI tools, although I started using some of them quite recently, and they definitely make things much easier for someone like me with limited English terms, vocabularies. My apologies, but I have to excuse myself now. So thank you very much. No questions asked. Yes, Adam?
Oh, hi. Just one little one I meant to ask earlier on. So with the remarkable Mitra search um, facility, so in terms of I see that it's limited to 50 results from what I could see, and then I just wanted to ask about the order of the results. So whether this is not easily how is it ordered? Is one able to precisely say how the sequence of the results is and which ones are omitted? Thank you.
Yes, I think this also links a bit back into what Bruno mentioned before. I think, yeah, I think Mitra search in a way is powerful, but also has some obvious weaknesses at the moment. And the one part is even to just clearly highlight which part of the result is actually relevant to the user's query. Like I think Bruno made this example of there are only 2 syllables that actually are relevant to the query I made. Yeah, this is certainly a problem. It's especially a problem because Mitra search has the ability to go across languages. And while if we think about just a Tibetan query and a Tibetan result, then yes, we can do some string matching. We can highlight that. I think that's absolutely doable. But if we have something going across language, it becomes an incredibly headache to do that reliably. Like I've been working a bit on algorithmic solutions for that, but it will take time to get it right. So right now, and the same problem, and it's probably an even bigger problem, is if we think about the ordering of the results in a meaningful way. And the problem for that is that people come to the system with very different assumptions. So for example, somebody who's working on, let's say, Pāli Sutta literature, and they are making a query, they will expect certain results to come up at the top of the results. And the technology behind that is not always able to respect that. So for example, you're searching for the term, I don't know, compassion, a very general topic. And then you get the first result might actually be an Atthakatha commentary, a later commentary on the term compassion, because it just expands very widely on the topic of compassion. And this might be actually a very rich resource, but our own bias would be more likely to say, okay, but I would like to have the sutta citation first because that's where the term started. So this is how we already get the problem that the ordering of the results in a way that it really makes sense with the expectation of the humans is incredibly difficult. And Mitra search has exactly this friction. So I think right now our system is constructed in a way that it will try to give the most relevant result to the query first. And relevant in that sense means semantically close. So in a way, that was just mostly discussing or similar to the topic, but it is inherently really difficult. And it's very difficult to do this in a precise and reliable way that satisfies a user base that comes from so many different directions. So some people might be very interested in later commentaries. So for them, it's totally fine that the system will return a commentary first. While for other people, the expectation would be no, the Agama should be the first result. That's where it started. Yeah, so technically very, very difficult. And this is also one reason why we are a bit hesitant with adding large amounts of data. So of course, the one remark is always, why don't you add all of BDSC to your system? And it would be great. And I think we are working on that to make that happen on a technical level. But that also means that we get this huge amount of possible data that I think, as Bruno mentioned, sometimes the Mitra deep research is not always returning relevant results. There can be things that are not relevant, but if we add a huge body of data, then we might increase the amount of noise that is actually present. And right now, since we are focusing on the canonical material with some priority and then are branching out selectively in more material, this also helps to some extent to contain this problem. But yeah, so I think adding the filter options that we are now putting online in the next coming days with the new system is going to help with that, because then it's again more responsibility to the user. So the user has to understand how to operate the filters. Mitra is not anymore a simple tool that gives you the perfect solution, but it's something that you actually need to understand how to interact with. You have to set the filters yourself. You have to understand the data. But I think that's the direction that we will take in the future to, yeah, have some kind of balance between the user making changes and having to do settings and the system then being able to retrieve data and to be reliable. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So, question or thank you note from Albert.
Yeah, I mean, I can read it out briefly. I think so.
Great.
Yeah, have you also covered some major AI tools available beyond translation? Probably our today's main focus, but providing chat box functions still basing on rich and reliable sources, but to directly address Buddhist questions regardless of academic or practical. So yeah, I think this is exactly the thing. And I think Melong AI might be a platform that is more developing in that direction. I'm not sure, but it seems to be more the case. I do believe that this would be a little bit of a difficult direction for Mitra to take. So far, we have been focusing on specific functionality like translation, reference search, and so on. And I think a general open-ended chat box functionality has the problem that it also invites the users to ask questions to the system that we are maybe not able to address and to be confident about. And it's really difficult to contain hallucination in this context. So I mean, we have tested it, and it's certainly possible to build an interesting tool. And I wouldn't be surprised if other people will come around with this soon. But I'm a bit more careful to make sure that, I mean, we already have problems with hallucination in our tool that is happening, but we want to keep it low. We want to make sure that it is a contained problem and not something that happens in every request. So in that regard, yeah, it's not really the direction we are taking, even though it's understandable that somebody might want to build this. Yeah.
There's a question by Bob and then Atsuki.
Hi, yeah, not a question. Just first of all, a wonderful presentation, Sebastian. I really appreciate the the caution with which you make your remarks and your sincere attempt to really see both the pros and the cons. I think that speaks to an integrity that I think we should all aspire to. And I just wanted to say thank you for all the work that you've done on, first of all, BuddhaNexus and now DharmaNexus. As a scholar of the Vinaya, this kind of tool is extremely useful for me, although I've only just begun to tap it. So I just wanted to thank you for all the effort you've put into that and all these other many endeavors. So best of luck.
Thank you so much, Bob. This is really, really kind of you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Atsuki?
Hi. Yeah, so hi, Sebastian. So although we both live in Japan, we haven't been able to meet each other. Myself living in Koyasan, you living in Tohoku. But anyway, hope to see you soon sometime.
Yes.
Thank you very much today. We both studied in Hamburg, and also myself, I studied in Ranjuye, did a translator's training program many years ago. But in any case, it has been a great day. Yeah, so I just want to know your opinion. It might be a little bit of a different level of, apart from Dharmamitra, but when it comes to a social implementation based largely on the LLM models, some implementation such as BuddhaPod, like you might know, Professor Seiji Kumagai from the Kyoto University has been developing this BuddhaPod that you will be able to sort of question and answer, just as if the Buddha is answering you, but based on the limited source. So this can be another sort of issue in the future that is sort of directly or indirectly connected with what you're doing. Also myself, I've been working for the governmental project on the mental issue. So as Buddhist scholars, we would like to make use of our traditional knowledge when it comes to our sort of mental issues in a modern period of time. And we are trying to make use of these tools as well. So what is your sort of idea, ethical challenges, and through your experience of dealing with AIs in this field of matters?
Yeah, I think this came up already very, very early. I think when I came to Berkeley at the beginning of 2023, there were all kinds of ideas of creating the Buddhist AI, and this was, I think, even before BuddhaBot launched. And I also remember we had actually a couple of meetings with investors who wanted to support a kind of larger initiative to create a Buddha AI, and maybe would have provided a lot of money for that. And it's kind of not hard to imagine that this would be an exciting thing to do. But I always found it this, I mean, maybe I'm a too technical person for those kind of things, because I'm always thinking about this, well, of course, I can picture how we can build a search engine that can find Sanskrit based on Tibetan, and I can absolutely picture how this would be useful for translators and philologists. And this is like where I can see, okay, this is the level of technology that works right now. Then we can create a machine translation system on top of that, and this would be super useful for philology and for translation, for people working at the projects of the Cancer Foundation and so on. I think this all makes a lot of sense. But then at the same time, if we think about like BuddhaBot, I mean, not to criticize that project, I think Seiji Kumagai and his team, they're doing great work, and I'm sure they are very responsible, and I have no criticism for that. But for me, it was always very difficult to imagine how we can have a system where somebody might ask a very mundane question like, this morning my cat died and I'm full of sorrow and suffering, and how can I deal with this? And then they go to Dharmamitra, and the first answer is, well, in the Abhidharma Mahavibhasha there are 15 different hells for cats, and if you die this, then the cat goes there. And is this the kind of information that really helps somebody in that context? I don't really think so. So I think Mitra is just structurally in a very bad position to become general purpose AI for Buddhism, and it shouldn't be. I think that's not the scope. And I think the gap that we have to bridge between the original literature, the sutra literature, the Shastra, all of this material, which is just like centuries and centuries removed from modern day issues. But I think this really requires the skill of humans, in my opinion, to bridge this gap, to communicate that content in a responsible way to an audience. And I think just to create an AI that is trained on, let's say, the entirety of BDRC, I think that would be an interesting experiment, but I don't think this would necessarily lead to an AI that is a responsible teacher on Buddhism. I'm actually very concerned about those kind of attempts. And again, I think BuddhaBot is not doing that. I think they have a very different approach. I think, to my understanding, is much more rooted in psychology and like more social, society-oriented approaches, which I think can work well, but it requires a very different team and a different orientation than Mitra is taking. So we are much more like a, text, close to the text philological tool. Yeah, and I think there are also other projects like Norbu AI, which I think is used quite prominently. It used to be prominently used in Southeast Asia, and is also kind of general purpose AI, especially helping monks and nuns to prepare sermons and to be used in the design of teachings and so on, which I also find really interesting. And I think any of these applications can probably be made in a responsible way if the kind of knowledge is controlled and there's a certain way to contain hallucinations and so on. but I think the gap between what our system is doing and what such systems are aiming for, I think, is still really, really big. And what would need to be constructed in between to create those links, I think, is a very, very big task. And of course, Nawang Trunde and I, we have discussed this many times, and I think we are both more or less on the same page that it would be fantastic to build, and somebody should do it. And I think at some point, Mitra is certainly happy to collaborate if there's some kind of reference to sutra functionality intended. But currently, I think there's still a lot of ground that needs to be covered to make such a system reliable. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
Yeah.
so I hope we can discuss more about this.
Yes.
Thank you.
I actually, absolutely. I think absolutely. I will meet Ryuta soon, and then hopefully we can come to Koya-san in the near
Okay.
future. Yes. Mhm.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Wonderful.
Mm.
So I guess we're coming towards the end of this session. There is one place we haven't necessarily addressed, but the whole thing about teaching, especially reviewing translations. We talked a little bit about it in reviewing translations, that we need humans. I'm thinking recently, very recently, I've started reviewing the students' translation using these tools, and actually found it so useful. It takes me half the time, quarter of the time, or maybe even less time than going over the text so diligently. So it's actually really helpful for me, and I can see how expertise is essential, because we can catch where the thing doesn't work, where the translation just doesn't add up. And then we get the support with the AI tools. So it's I think there's lots to develop in terms of how it can be used in the learning process still. I think we're still very young at it.
Yes.
So I don't know. We might have to meet again next year and see what has happened on that level, right?
Yeah, maybe we have news from Dharmamitra by that time as well when it comes to new functionality, hopefully integrating references to translations in English. That would be such a nice feature, I think. So.
Yes, would really, really, really appreciate if you accepted to come back at RYI, and whether in person or online, whatever is useful, easier.
Yes, I would love to do that. I think this is I think I always value these opportunities to engage with the people who use our system, who have feedback to give, regardless of what direction. I think we try to listen as much as we can to make sure that our system is really done in a responsible way and in a way that it really helps the community. Yeah. So this is a wonderful, wonderful discussion that we are having here.
Great. So definitely, and we definitely will, if you're in town, we'll take you for lunch or supper or both.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah.
There is one more from Rajiv. Is there any opportunity to do internship?
Yes, this is actually possible. And if you, we have our email address, which I think is dharmamitra.project at googlemail.gmail.com. I'm just typing it into the chat, but I think you can also find it on our website. If you scroll down, there's a symbol. Yeah, just send us an email or write me directly at my Tohoku email. That's also possible. I will drop that as well. And then we can discuss this. I think I think we had interns in the past, and we always try to engage people who are interested. So please reach out to us, and we hopefully we can work together. Yes.
So when you work with internship, you what kind of work can interns do?
There are, of course, different aspects. So if the intern is from a computer science background, and at Berkeley we had quite a lot of interns naturally who were in computer science who wanted to contribute. And then, of course, it's obvious that we can work on some database application, some control of our precision of the result and so on. And also a lot of work, as you can imagine, a lot of work really goes into data preparation, into preparing data in a way that it is useful for the system. Yeah, so this kind of work for people who have more of a humanities background, that is also always great if we have interns from that direction, because they can help us with quality issues in the system, to work with the translator, to also collect feedback from within the community. So there's really a lot to do for our system, and it's a small project, so we are happy for any helping hand for anybody who wants to do something. So
Wonderful.
Mm.
So thank you very much, everybody, for coming to this session. It's really kind of like one way we can actually bridge the past with the future coming at us quite fast. So let's hope we can do that gently and with a
Yes.
little bit of panache. So just be aware, if you're interested in our public talks, we have one public talk by Kempo Mriti Gurung, who will be talking at RYI, both online and in person, on psychology and Abhidharma Yogacara. So if you're interested, particularly on the 51 mental factors according to Asanga. So if you're interested in that topic, please join us on Wednesday, this Wednesday. And we have more events coming on the 25th and 26th of April. Roundtable on research, translation, and museology. So how do we interact with museums and their collections, sometime not yet digitalized? So how do we do that? How do we work together and collaborate? That's another topic that will be discussed. And as well as on the 26th, there will be heritage and storytelling discussion. So if you're interested, stay tuned. You're welcome to join us. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, all of you. And see you soon, I hope. Thank you again, Sebastian.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure and a wonderful audience. This was really, really great. Yes. Thank you so much.